Lore Listening Library, Volume 6, Dragon Age Origins, Books and Songs. Aveline, Knight of Orlais. Aveline was born to an Orlesian farmer near the city of Halam-Sharal in the early half of the Storm Age. She was a large and ugly baby, and her father had hoped for a boy. Not wanting another mouth to feed, the farmer left Aveline in the woods to die from exposure. But a traveling band of Dalish elves came upon the crying child. The elves took her into their clan and raised her as their own. They taught her archery, dueling, and survival skills. When she came of age, she was larger and stronger than most men, let alone elven women. Her adoptive parents knew that she was a fine warrior, so they encouraged her to enter a human tournament in nearby Montsamard. But women were not permitted to join the knighthood in Orlais, nor to compete in a tournament, so Aveline joined the tournament as a man. Her clan forged a suit of armor with a full helm and gave her an ironbark sword of the finest quality. Aveline entered the competition claiming to be a knight of Antiva. She refused to doff her helmet even during the archery competition. And sure enough, Aveline bested many other knights until, in the grand melee, she came upon Kaliva, a knight who served the emperor and was considered the finest in the land. Kaliva was determined not to be beaten and struck swiftly and strongly. As Aveline matched each of his blows, Kaliva grew ever more frustrated. Finally, in desperation, he tripped Aveline and threw her to the ground. The blow knocked her helm from her head, and Kaliva was shamed. He called to have the competition declared invalid, but the crowd booed and jeered. In anger, Kaliva turned and slew Aveline as she lay helpless. The son of the emperor, Prince Freyan, was also present at the tourney. He too had been beaten by Aveline, but he recognized her skill and bravery and was saddened by the injustice of her death. Upon rising to the emperor's seat in 744 Storm, Freyan abolished the law that disallowed women from joining the Orlesian knighthood and posthumously knighted Aveline. Although women in the Orlesian knighthood are still a rarity today, all those who became knights revere Sir Aveline as their patron. Aveline, Knight of Orlais by Lord Francois Magny, 8-4 Blessed. Ballad of Islay. The wind that stirs their shallow graves carries their song across the sands. Heed our words, hear our cry, the grey are sworn, in peace we lie. Heed our words, hear our cry, our names recalled, we cannot die. When darkness comes and swallows lights, heed our words, and we shall rise. From the Ballad of Islay, said to have been written after the Battle of Islay, which ended the Fourth Blight, 520 Exalted. Meditations and Odes to Bees. O fair damsel of the garden, Arlessa of honeysuckle and rose, I humbly beg your gracious pardon for the offense that here arose. Surely your work is far too vital to be interrupted by one like me. I am in no way entitled to earn the notice of a honey bee. I was a fool to pluck that flower for my fair lady. On my honor, I swear to bring you dozens more within the hour, if you give me leave to try. Listen, traveler, if you would walk the garden path some spring, mind that you don't trespass, for the gardeners do sting. By Anonymous. Adventures of the Black Fox. Born Lord Remy Vascal in 863 Blessed, The Black Fox was a dashing thief and rogue who went on to inspire so many tales of his exploits that it's nearly impossible to determine today which are true and which are merely fabricated legend. Despite coming from nobility, he has become something of a hero of the common people. His initial exploits involved ridiculing the tyrannical and powerful Lord of Valchaven. Wearing a mask, he would appear in public and disrupt the Lord's plans to the point that the Lord angrily put a huge bounty on the life of this cunning fox, the origin of the nickname which stuck. That the primary bounty hunter who took the job, Carolus, ended up becoming Remy's lifelong partner in crime, only after nearly killing him several times, is one of the most popular tales told in taverns today. The story is often exaggerated to make Remy appear initially buffoonish until Carolus becomes so furious at the Black Fox's inexplicable ability to survive that the cunning Remy gains the upper hand, which impresses Carolus so much that the bounty hunter joins him. After years of terrorizing the Lord's men and foiling his tax collectors, a favorite pastime of Remy's according to the Orlesian commoners, Remy was supposedly betrayed by his lover, Servana de Montfort. In some versions of the tale, a mage of the circle, no less, and was captured. After more than a year of torture, Remy was rescued from prison by his compatriots, including a repentant Servana, and together they escaped Orlais. In this period of Remy's adventures, he appears almost everywhere in Thedas. As his legend grew, more innkeepers and merchants were happy to claim that the Black Fox had visited their village, or established and performed some legendary feat. If the tales are to be believed, Remy led the Lord's men on a merry chase. He became embroiled in political intrigue in Navarra, was hunted by Antivan crows, and then kidnapped by a powerful mage in Tevinter. In each situation, Remy escaped death at the last moment, foiled the evildoer, and improved the life of the poor and downtrodden. Then, inevitably, he rejoined his band of adventurers and moved on to the next land. His companions, Carolus and Servana, the wise dwarf Bolek, and the tempestuous knight Sir Clematis, have each spawned their own individual legends over the years. The stories all agree that, at some point, the Black Fox disappeared. He and his fellow adventurers voyaged into the heart of the Arlathan forest, seeking the sunken city of elves, and never returned. Many more are the tales that expand on what ultimately happened to them in that forest, and postulate on how they could someday be rescued. From The Adventures of the Black Fox by Gaston Girault, 911 Dragon. The Holy Brazier. Brazier that stands atop the stairs in the great hall of our temple has always been something of a mystery to us. This is the brazier that created the beings we call the Ash Wraiths. This is where Andraste's followers emulated themselves and became the eternal guardians of her temple. I have painstakingly pieced together information from old books and from the tales and half-truths passed down to us by our forefathers. I believe I now understand the ritual used to create the wraiths. The brazier was lit with a consecrated taper, its flame taken from the everlasting fire that long ago consumed Andraste herself. The chosen disciple would fast and pray for weeks, taking into his body nothing but a sip of water a day. When the disciple was finally ready, he would place in his mouth a flawless black pearl and step into the flames. In ancient Tevinter, black pearls were thought to be magical, able to stop the soul from passing through the veil when held in the mouth at the moment of death. Thus, Andraste's disciples consigned themselves to the eternal flame. They became dust and ashes, and rose again and again to protect the most beloved of the Maker. From the Journal of Father Colgrim. The Legend of Calenhad, Chapter 1. Prior to the crowning of King Calenhad, Ferelden was little more than a collection of independent Arlings and Treniers that warred on each other constantly over petty matters. Calenhad was born on 510 Exalted as the third son of a high-ever merchant on hard times. He was eventually sent to a distant cousin, a poor young knight named Sir Foranin, who made Calenhad his squire and dog handler. As the tale goes, Sir Foranin and his squire became caught up in one of the wars of unity at that time. Arl Mirden was a strong but generally disliked man who was making a bid for kingship. Foranin's own lord, a young fool of an Arl named Tenedor, no older than Calenhad, was besieged by Mirden's forces at his castle, today known as West Hill. When Mirden called Tenedor out to parley, the young Arl asked for a volunteer from among the squires, someone who could masquerade as Tenedor in the parley party. Calenhad kneeled before Tenedor and asked for the honor. Much to Tenedor's and Sir Foranin's dismay, Calenhad immediately identified himself to Arl Mirden. When asked by the Arl why he was there, Calenhad explained that he had been asked to take the place of his lord. The Arl said that he had planned to kill Tenedor. Was Calenhad willing to die in his lord's place as well? Calenhad impressed Mirden and his allies by saying that he was. Mirden offered Calenhad a place as his own squire, but Calenhad refused, stating that if Mirden had planned on betraying the right of parley, he was no man of honor. Mirden's allies laughed at that, and Mirden himself conceded that Calenhad had a point. He allowed Calenhad to return to the castle safely and launched his final assault. During the assault, both Tenedor and Foranin were killed, but Calenhad found himself in a one-on-one combat with Arl Mirden. In front of all of Mirden's allies, Calenhad defeated the Arl and commanded he call off his armies. The Arl asked Calenhad who he professed to serve now, if both his knight and his lord were dead, to which Calenhad replied he would do as his honor bade him to, for he had nothing else. "You are not a man known for your honor," Calenhad said, "but I believe you wish to be. You allowed me to live once, and so now I do the same to you. Perhaps if more of our people lived by honor, we would learn to trust each other long enough to live together." And with that, Calenhad withdrew his sword. "I am humbled by your words," Arl Mirden told Calenhad, dropping to one knee. To his allies he shouted that he now knew he would never be king, but he knew who should be. With that, Mirden pledged allegiance to Calenhad, whom he named Tiern and ruler of Tenedor's lands. From the Legend of Calenhad by Brother Heron, Chantry Scribe, 810 Blessed. The Legend of Calenhad, Chapter 2. With the allegiance of Arl Mirden, Calenhad began his rise to greatness. Some of Mirden's allies also pledged allegiance, but most thought him foolhardy. A boy commoner was to lead them and become king. Over the years that followed, however, Calenhad would prove himself worthy of Mirden's trust. With each victory, he won over more men to his command, and his reputation as a man of honor spread. Eventually, during his campaign against the lowland Banorn, he met his most infamous friend and companion, the vaunted warrior Lady Shayna. Calenhad married the famously beautiful daughter of Mirden, Mairin, and his firm belief in the ways of the Chantry became the staple of his court. In a time when the Chantry was still new to the lands and the courts following Andraste held the majority of power in Ferelden, Calenhad began to solidify the nation as one in line with the other nations around it. This piety eventually won over to Calenhad those faithful in Ferelden who had been waiting for such a leader. With Lady Shayna at his side, Calenhad was unstoppable, and by 542 Exalted, the war for Ferelden had come down to one final battle against the collected forces of Simeon, Tairn of Denerim, and the most potent nobleman in the land. Callan had persuaded the Circle of Magi to come to his aid, as well as the Ash Warriors, and in the Battle of White Valley, he famously defeated Tairn Simeon and united the nation. During the battle, Simeon nearly killed Calanhad, but Lady Shayna intervened and took the wound for him, slaying Simeon. Calanhad was crowned king in Denerim that year, with Mairen his queen, but he spent much of the months that followed nursing Lady Shayna back to health. King Calanhad's Ferelden was peaceful for a time, with the chantry spreading quickly under the king's guidance. Everywhere the king and queen went, they were surrounded by cheering crowds. The common folk celebrated Calanhad as one of their own who had achieved the impossible, and trade opened with many outside lands for the first time in Ferelden's existence. But, as with many such golden ages, it was not to last. From the Legend of Calanhad by Brother Heron, Chantry Scribe 810 Blessed. The Legend of Calanhad, Chapter 3. Calanhad legends tell that Lady Shayna harbored a love for her king that went beyond friendship. A love that she kept secret out of her sense of duty and honor. When offered a love potion by a witch in disguise, a witch who would later turn out to be a vengeance-seeking sister of Arl Simeon, Lady Shayna gave in to temptation. She used the potion on Calanhad, but Queen Mairen discovered the two of them together that night, and broken-hearted fled Denerim to return to her father. She told Myrddin everything, and he angrily threatened to revoke his support of Calanhad and begin anew the civil war. It is said that Lady Shayna felt remorseful at her manipulation of her best friend's heart and confessed her use of forbidden magic to the court. Although her life was forfeit, Calanhad forgave Lady Shayna for what she had done and refused to have her executed. Myrddin furiously roused the other Arls against Calanhad and Lady Shayna, and it was not long before Ferelden stood on the brink of civil war once again. Against Calanhad's orders, Lady Shayna went alone to Mairen to plead for peace and plead her case, only to be found out by Myrddin and slain. Angered, but also saddened, Calanhad challenged Myrddin to an honor duel, a fight neither of them wanted, but both knew was necessary, and Myrddin was slain. The death of the king's greatest ally, an important Arl, was too much for the young kingdom to bear. The other Arls would not back down in their claims against Calanhad. The threat of civil war rose once again. Calanhad went to his wife one last time then, although none know what he said to her, and then he simply vanished. He left with Mairen a proclamation abdicating his throne in favor of the son his queen carried in her belly, who eventually ascended to the throne as King Waylon I, the king credited with establishing the Theron dynasty lasting to this day. Calanhad would never reappear. The legend of Calanhad himself only grew over time, as stories and sightings multiplied, even long after the point where Calanhad could possibly still be alive. Some say he disappeared into the Kokari wilds, or went to live with the dwarves, or even became a monk in a reclusive chantry order. The chantry named Calanhad one of the Anointed in 788 Storm. Calanhad's storm, Nematos, was left with Mairen and became a symbol of Ferelden kingship over the next century. Rumors of its magical powers grew, and when it was lost in the ambush that killed King Venedrin in 824 Blessed, it was seen as a great blow to the Theron line. Several false swords have appeared since that time, but never has the true sword resurfaced. From The Legend of Calanhad by Brother Heron, Chantry Scribe 810 Blessed. Caridin's Journal. 940, 45th day, 5th year of the reign of King Valtor. I have done it. The vision the ancestors gave me has come to fruition. Today a man sat up from my forge, a man of living stone and steel. I called him Golem, for the legend of those great statues animated by the dead. They are our future and our salvation. 940, 60th day, 5th year of the reign of King Valtor. It is a horrific process. Not every man could do such a thing and survive with his mind intact. I am honored that the ancestors believe I have the strength to bear this burden and forge Orgzammar's defenders. Nothing so great may be achieved without sacrifice, nor may stone and steel walk without a spirit to animate them. 940, 73rd day, 5th year of the reign of King Valtor. I have asked for volunteers. Some few answered, men of the warrior caste, younger sons with no property, no chance for marriage. They want to defend Orgzammar from the horrors these humans have unleashed. They want to live forever in a body stronger than the finest armor. They do not ask to speak of those who have gone before. I have put off saying this, even in these pages, but I must say it now. My golems will be powered by their deaths. These brave warriors come to me, naked as the day they were born. I dress them in the skin of armor, so large it makes the burliest look no more than a babe, the anvil their first and final cradle. We are surrounded by a mile of earth on all sides. No one hears the screams as I pour molten lyrium through the eye holes, the mouth, every joint and chink in the armor. They silence quickly, but the smell lingers, just a trace of blood in the greater stench of hot metal. I must work fast. The armor is malleable now, as I shape it with the hammer and tongs. It is not long before it moves beneath my hands, writhing and twisting with every blow. It speaks again now, a low moan, but I have learned to tune it out. I can afford no error in this craft. There can be no melted slag blinding the eyes, nor an unhewn bit of granite shackling the leg. They groan at my work, or would they rather be broken, crippled? Those I have spoken to tell me of the pain, but could they see themselves, they would see perfection. From the Journal of Caridin. The History of the Chantry, Chapter 1. The first blight devastated the Tevinter Imperium. Not only had the Darkspawn ravaged the countryside, but Tevinter citizens had to face the fact that their own gods had turned against them. Dumat, the old god once known as the Dragon of Silence, had risen to silence the world, and despite the frenzied pleas for help, the other old gods did nothing. The people of the Imperium began to question their faith, murdering priests and burning temples to punish their gods for not returning to help. In those days, even after the devastation of the First Blight, the Imperium stretched across the known world. Fringed with barbarian tribes, the Imperium was well prepared for invasions and attacks from without. Fitting, then, that the story of its downfall begins from within. The people of the far northern and eastern reaches of the Imperium rose up against their powerful overlords in rebellion. The Tevinter magisters summoned demons to put down these small rebellions, leaving corpses to burn as examples of all who would dare revolt. The Imperium began to tear itself apart from within, throngs of angry and disillusioned citizens doing what centuries of opposing armies could not. But the magisters were confident in their power, and they could not imagine surviving a blight only to be destroyed by their own subjects. Even after the Blight, Tevinter commanded an army larger than that of any other organized nation in Thedas. But that army was scattered, and its morale dwindling. The ruin of Tevinter was such that the Alamari barbarians, who had spread their clans and holes over the wilderness of the Ferelden Valley at the far southeast edge of the Imperium, saw weakness in their enemy, and after an age of oppression, embarked on a campaign not only to free their own lands, but to bring down mighty Tevinter as well. The leaders of that blessed campaign were the great barbarian warlord Mafarath and his wife Andraste. Their dreams and ambition would change the world forever. From Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The History of the Chantry, Chapter 2. When the prophet Andraste and her husband Mafarath arrived at the head of their barbarian horde, southern Tevinter was thrown into chaos. The Imperium had defended against invasions in the past, but now they stood without the protection of their gods, with their army in tatters and their country devastated by the Blight. Many felt the timing of the invasion was yet another of the Maker's miracles in Andraste's campaign to spread his divine word. Andraste was more than simply the wife of a warlord, after all. She was also the betrothed of the Maker. Enraptured by the melodic sound of her voice as she sang to the heavens for guidance, the Maker himself appeared to Andraste and proposed that she come with him, leaving behind the flawed world of humanity. In her wisdom, Andraste pleaded with the Maker to return to his people and create paradise in the world of men. The Maker agreed, but only if all of the world would turn away from their worship of false gods and accept the Maker's divine commandments. Armed with the knowledge of the one true God, Andraste began the exalted marches into the weakened Imperium. One of the Maker's commandments, that magic should serve man rather than rule over him, was as honey to the souls of the downtrodden in Tevinter who lived under the thumbs of the Magisters. Word of Andraste's exalted march, of her miracles and military successes, spread far and wide. Those in the Imperium who felt the old gods had abandoned them eagerly listened to the words of the Maker. Those throngs of restless citizens that destroyed temples now did so in the name of the Maker and his prophet Andraste. As Mafarath's armies conquered the lands of southern Tevinter, so did Andraste's words conquer hearts. It is said that the Maker smiled on the world at the Battle of Valerian Fields, in which the forces of Mafarath challenged and defeated the greatest army Tevinter could muster. The southern reaches of the mighty Imperium now lay at the mercy of barbarians. Faith in the Maker, bolstered by such miracles, threatened to shake the foundations of the Imperium apart. Of course, the human heart is more powerful than the greatest weapon, and when wounded, it is capable of the blackest of deeds. From Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. History of the Chantry, Chapter 3. It is said that at the Battle of Valerian Fields, Mafarath stood and looked over his armies. He had conquered the southern reaches of the greatest empire the world had ever known and built splintered barbarian clans into a force to be feared. With pride in his heart, he turned to congratulate his men and found that they had turned from him. Mafarath fell to the evil of jealousy. After all he had done, his wife was the one to receive all the glory. He saw his wife's power and influence and tired of his place as second husband below the Maker. His heart swelled with fury. If he had conquered just to have his wife wrested from him by a forgotten god and a legion of faith-hungry rabble, then perhaps this war was not worth the trouble. Here, history and the Chant of Light come apart. History tells us that Mafrath looked north into the Central Imperium and saw nothing but more war against a rapidly regrouping army, and he despaired. The Chant of Light holds that Mafrath chafed with jealousy of the Maker and jealousy of the glory that Andraste received, although it was he who led the armies. Mafrath traveled to the imperial capital of Minrathous to speak with the Archon Hessarian. There he offered his wife to the Imperium in return for a truce that would end hostilities once and for all. The Archon, eager to put down the voice of the prophet that stirred his own people against him, agreed. Mafrath led Andraste into an ambush, where she was captured by Imperial agents, putting an end to her exalted march. Crowds of loyalists stood in the central square of Minrathous to watch Andraste's execution. By command of the Archon, she was burned at the stake, in which the Imperium believed to be the most painful punishment imaginable. According to the Chantry, however, Andraste was instead purified and made whole by the flames, ascending to life at her Maker's side. By all accounts, there was only silence where they expected screams. At the sight of the prophet burning, the crowds were filled with a profound guilt, as if they had participated in a great blasphemy. So moving was the moment that the Archon himself drew his sword and thrust it into the prophet's heart, ending her torment and leaving those assembled to consider the weight of what they had seen. Whereas the execution of Andraste was meant to be a symbol of defeat for the faith of the Maker, in truth, it all but sealed the fate of the worship of the old gods and paved the way for the spread of the Maker's chant. From Tales of the Destruction of Thetis by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The History of the Chantry, Chapter 4. The crowds present at the death of Andraste were right to feel despair. It is believed that the prophet's execution angered the Maker, and he turned his back on humanity once more, leaving the people of Thetis to suffer in the dark. In these dark times, mankind scrambled for a light, any light. Some found comfort in demonic cults that promised power and riches in return for worship. Others prayed to the old gods for forgiveness, begging the great dragons to return to the world. Still others fell so low as to worship the Darkspawn, forming vile cults dedicated to the exaltation of evil in its purest form. It is said that the world wept as its peoples begged for a savior who would not come. Andraste's followers, however, did not abandon her teachings when she died. The cult of Andraste rescued her sacred ashes from the courtyard in Minrathous after her execution, stealing them away to a secret temple. The location of that temple has long been lost, but the ashes of Andraste served as a symbol of the enduring nature of the faith in the Maker, that humanity can earn the Maker's forgiveness despite its grievous insult to him. With time, the cult of Andraste spread and grew, and the Chant of Light took form. Sing this chant in the four corners of Thetis, it is said, and the world would gain the Maker's attention at last. As the Chant of Light spread, the cult of Andraste became known as the Andrastian Chantry. Those who converted to the Chantry's beliefs found it their mission to spread Andraste's word. There were many converts, including powerful people in the Imperium and in the city-states of what is now Orlais. Such was the power of the Maker's word that the young King Drakon undertook a series of exalted marches meant to unite the city-states and create an empire solely dedicated to the Maker's will. The Orlesian Empire became the seat of the Chantry's power, the grand cathedral in Val Royeaux, the source of the movement that birthed the organization as we know it today. Drakon, by then Emperor Drakon I, created the Circle of Magi, the Order of Templars, and the Holy Office of the Divine. Many within the Chantry revere him nearly as equal with Andraste herself. The modern Chantry is a thing of faith and beauty, but is also a house of necessity, protecting Thedas from powerful forces that would do it harm. Where the Grey Wardens protect the world from the blights, the Chantry protects mankind from itself. Most of all, the Chantry works to earn the Maker's forgiveness, so that one day he will return and transform the world into the paradise it was always meant to be. From Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The Tale of Ilorin. In the days after the rising of Zazikil, the Dark Ones covered every corner of the land. The archdemon drove all the nations of the world before him, Shemblin and Elven alike. In the far north, where the hills wander the plains, and the earth is eternally baked beneath the uncaring sun, the lands which the Shemblin call Anderfels, a clan of our people lived, struggling to survive the blight. Ilorin was their keeper, a hunter in his younger days, crafty as any wolf. He led his people always just ahead of the darkspawn who chased him. But the old hunter knew that even Hala cannot run forever. They must turn and fight or be run down. At the foot of the Murdain, the darkspawn cornered Ilorin's clan. That night the moon was strangled by clouds, the earth concealed by a dread mist that rose out of nowhere, so that the Elven could not tell up from down. In the confusion, the darkspawn attacked. But Ilorin had prepared for them. All around the camp, the hunters had strewn dry grass, brush, and brambles. When the sound of rustling footfalls began, Ilorin and the other Haren called upon the old magic. They struck out with lightning, and though the bolts missed the darkspawn, they hit their target all the same. The sea of kindling lit, and not one of the dark creatures made it through the fire to reach Ilorin's clan. From the Tale of Ilorin, written by Zathrian, as it had been passed down from keeper to keeper from generations. Dane and the Werewolf. Let me sing of heroes in honor lost and found, of monsters and men in all forms, of Dane without peer, feared by the force of Ferelden, who one autumn morn spied a heart of pure white in beam of warmest sun, a prize for huntsman's spear. Through the greenwood they ran, hart and hunter together, bringing the stag to appear at last in a long-forgotten grove. Heedless that the chase had waked a hunger in the golden wood, a werewolf, a creature with mind of man, lured by the hunt, and came forth to lay claim to the heart as rightful tribute, drawn by the scent of cooling blood. In the silence the two hunters held, Dane, spear-armed against the wolf with all his brood, knew with sinking heart he was lost. Steeled for the winding roads of the Fade, then the beast spoke, human-like in voice. You have taken the stag from my woods and my pack, but nothing comes without a cost. The wolf pack circled ever closer, and he who felled boars and bears with his bright blade knew fear. They spoke his name in roars, like gravestones offering a beast's bargain. Die here, huntsman, alone and forgotten, or take my place amongst the wolves, as I take your place amongst men. Thus was a bargain struck, and Dane the wolf pack served in wolven form, and the werewolf to his family sped as Dane. 1 year and 1 day all told, but some things cannot be repent, some coinage cannot be unspent, when hearts are wagers, a fissure rent. From the saga of Dane and the Werewolf, as recorded by the minstrel Ukam, 485 Black. Death of a Templar. The dry, dusty earth swallows up salty drops that splatter its surface. A tiny insect pauses, sensing the vibrations, and scurries off, leaving behind its invisible enemy. As the drops fall, the dark circles merge together, expressing a mirror to their creator. The primal emotions of bloodlust and sorrow blend into a lethal cocktail that breaks the strongest of men. The jurisdiction of strength must be left to the spirit, not arm nor chest. Only the wisest turn to his inner sanctuary to partition the mind from an all-encompassing madness. Seductive voices whispering promise of glory, weighting down the weaker path of the flesh, bringing a death far worse than that of hot lead or steel. These blank, hollow promises will echo the unfathomable eternally. Living comfortably amongst material possessions, it is easy to understand the true meaning of uncontrollable hate. Failing to understand the power of fighting against pure, unfaltering beliefs, against foes that listen only to their soul. Uncontrollable hate. Influenced and thus removed from innocence, the scar is permanent and internal. The rain, now red, feeds the debt owed for actions past, seeking further into the earth as the mind draws slower. What was it that drew himself to this situation? The mind ebbs and parts to a lingering memory of true innocence. He entered war as a newborn enters the world, unknowing of both the horrors and the light of the Maker that will save him. The sound of metal sliding against leather comes from above him. From the second he was born to his soon-to-be dying breath, his mind was processing and analyzing knowledge and experiences. It is true that he thought he could be wise in his own eyes, but only the most humble recognizes he knows very little. Bias, speculation, and all of false pretenses make way to the sound of the sweeping steel, and then finally his soul, as ready as his eyes, dry from this final understanding, enters his promise in its purest form. From Death of a Templar by Sir Andrew, Knight of Andraste and Templar Archivist, 9-4 Dragon. A very chewed and moist book. Much of this is illegible. Day 42. I begin to suspect that we're being manipulated, as if by some unseen hand far above us. Always, I heard the sound of clicking. Click, 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 click. Several pages are missing, and much of the ink on the remaining page has run together. And then I told them I wouldn't take any cheese unless it came directly from the revered mother's hand. Mud, or something similar, has soaked the pages here. Day 115. My mother told me I was special. I never knew how right she was. The ink has smeared horribly. It was Eusaris! I swear it! It looked just like the carving in the Arl's drawing room. I sent it to the circle to verify, but I haven't heard. From A Very Chewed and Moist Book. The Nolandar Anthology of Dwarven Poetry. The dead exhumed, born from the shallowest graves, mined from the living. By Paragon Lynchcar, 744 Storm. Do you like fried mush and nug? I do not like them, Mr. Clug. I do not like fried mush and clug. Would you eat them on a rug? If you eat them, you'll get a hug. I would not eat them on a rug. From you I would not want a hug. Then would you drink them from a jug? Come on, give them a chug. I would not drink them from a jug. I'd rather eat a slimy slug. Would you eat them with a bug? Would you share them with a thug? I would not share them with a thug. I would not eat them with a bug. Not for a hug, not on a rug. From a jug I will not chug. Come on now, Mr. Clug. Are you on some kind of drug? I eat them in this hole I dug. Eat them, don't just shrug. I've had it, Mr. Clug. Down into that hole you dug. Down with the thug, and the slug, and the bug. By Paragon Seuss, 212 Glory. Never surrender. Dwarvish blood may be lukewarm, but vital as ore. By Paragon Lynchcar, 748 Storm. There was once a miner of lyrium, whose face looked like a perineum. The dead got him too, not much he could do. With a face like that he was shoe-in. From the wordsmith Carlal of House Yanok, 911 Dragon. Feast day fish. Fluffy mackerel pudding. 2 stalks of celery, 1 green pepper, half a pound of poached mackerel, 1 small onion finely diced, 2 teaspoon mustard, 1 teaspoon salt, half teaspoon ground Antivan pepper, 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground mace, dash of ground cardamom seed, 2 eggs beaten, 2 eggs boiled and sliced for garnish. This book, found in Arl Eames' estate, naturally falls open to this page. The First Blight, Chapter 1. Thedas is a land of fierce diversity, from the assassin princes of Antiva to the faded griffins of the Anderfells. But in my travels I have found one tale that unites the people of this land. It is the story of pride and damnation, and although the telling differs, the essence of the tale remains the same. At the height of its power, the Tevinter Imperium stretched over much of Thedas, uniting the known world under the rule of the tyrannical Magisters. It is said that the old gods whom the Magisters worshipped gave them the knowledge of blood magic, and the Magisters used this forbidden power to cement their rule. The blood of elven slaves and humans alike ran down imperial altars to fuel Magister greed, the tales of their excesses so horrifying that one can only be grateful that blood magic is prohibited today. But all that stands tall must eventually fall. Perhaps they foresaw their ruin, or perhaps their pride knew no bounds. But whatever the reason, the Magisters dared to open a magical portal into the Golden City at the heart of the Fade. They sought to usurp the Maker's throne, long left unattended in the Golden City after the Maker turned his back on his creations. They would storm heaven itself with their power and become as gods. This is what the Chantry, in its oft-exercised tendency to understate, refers to as the second sin. According to most versions of the tale, the Magisters did indeed reach the Golden City and walked into the home of the Maker, where no living being before them had dared or been able to tread. But humanity is not meant to walk in heaven. The Magisters were wicked with pride and other sins, and their presence tainted the Golden City. What once was a perfect, holy citadel became a twisted home of darkness and nightmares. The Magisters were expelled back through their gateway and cursed for their treachery. As the Golden City had been tainted, so were the Magisters twisted and transformed into things of darkness, the very first of the Darkspawn. The Golden City, once a shining beacon at the heart of the Fade, became the Black City, a reminder that all man's pride has cost. From Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The First Blight, Chapter 2. People today have little concept of the consequences of the second sin. Oh, believe me when I say that when asked, pious chantry-going folk will curse the use of foul magic, spitting and snapping their fingers, but none live today who actually remember the horror that was unleashed so very long ago. Whatever records might have existed regrettably did not survive the chaos and ignorance that was to follow. We only have the tales of survivors handed down through the murky ages and the dogma of the chantry to instruct us, and that is precious little indeed. I believe I am not understating when I say that the second sin unleashed the bane of all life upon Thedas. The Darkspawn are more virulent than the worst plague, a heartless force of nature that came into our world like an ill wind. We know from accounts of later blights, as these Darkspawn invasions came to be called, never has a more appropriate name existed, that the Darkspawn spread disease and famine wherever they tread. The earth itself is corrupted by their presence, the sky roiling with angry black clouds. I do not exaggerate, my friends, when I say that a mass gathering of Darkspawn is an omen of dread cataclysm. It is said that those cursed magisters who became the first Darkspawn scratched at the very earth to find solace in the darkness of the dwarven deep roads, and there in the shadows they multiplied. Whether by intelligent design or by some last vestige of worship in their minds, they attempted to locate the old gods they had once served. They found what they sought. Dumat, first of the old gods, once known as the Dragon of Silence, before the Maker imprisoned him and all his brethren beneath the earth for the first sin, usurping the Maker's place in mankind's heart. The slumbering dragon awoke, freed from the Maker's prison by his twisted followers, and became corrupted himself. Dumat was transformed into the first archdemon, his great and terrible power given will by a rotting, unholy mind. With the Darkspawn horde following, Dumat rose and took wings in the sky once again, bringing ruin to the world the Maker had created. The old god had become the eye of a dark storm that would ravage the entire world. From Tales of Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The First Blight, Chapter 3. The world during the First Blight was different from the world we know today. Aside from the civilized rule of the Imperium, humans as a race were largely barbarous and splintered, divided into clans and tribes and squabbling among themselves for resources. At the same time, deep beneath Thedas's great mountain ranges spawned a dwarven culture as organized and advanced as ours was primitive. As the Darkspawn bubbled up to the surface from their underground lairs, mankind first buckled and then fought back. The armies of Tevinter attempted to face down the multitudes of twisted creatures and the horrid rotting of the land around them, but they could not be everywhere at once. Human history remembers the First Blight as a time of terrible devastation, and those stories are accurate. But in our arrogance, we often forget the price paid by the dwarves in their isolated mountain kingdoms. The dwarves faced far greater hordes than humanity as the Darkspawn challenged them for control of the underground. Despite the might and technology the dwarves brought to bear, the savage Darkspawn tore through them, first destroying the more remote Taigs before swallowing up entire kingdoms. Think of it. An entire civilization lost in the space of decades. Compared to the near genocide that the dwarves faced, what we humans call the First Blight must have seemed a mere skirmish. Against the Darkspawn, the Dwarven lands have always borne the brunt of the fighting and the majority of the sacrifices. 4 Dwarven kingdoms finally managed to combine their might and fight back, and that cooperation saved them. But for the rest of their lands, it was too late. The Darkspawn had taken the deep roads, the majestic underground passages that linked the Dwarven lands throughout Thedas. The Darkspawn could now attack anywhere on the surface through these tunnels. Humanity simply was not prepared for such an onslaught. It was clear that the warfare we knew would not avail us. We had to find a new way to fight. Thus came our salvation. The Grey Wardens were born. From the Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The First Blight, Chapter 4. Founded at Weishaupt Fortress in the Anderfells, the Grey Wardens offered humanity hope in its darkest hour. Veterans of decades of battles with the Darkspawn came together, and the best among them pledged to do whatever was necessary to stem the tide of darkness that swept across the land. These great humans, elves, and dwarves pooled their knowledge of the enemy and formed a united front to finally put a stop to the Archdemon's rampage. And stop it they did. Ballads are still told today of the first Grey Warden charge into the waves of Darkspawn at the city of Nordbotten, each warden facing 10 or 20 Darkspawn at a time. Squadrons of Grey Wardens, mounted on their mighty griffins, soaring through the blackened skies and battling the terrible Archdemon with spear and spell. Oh, what a sight it must have been. Incredibly, the Grey Wardens won that first battle. They raised their arms in victory, and suddenly there was hope. The Grey Wardens led the lands of men and the last stalwart defenders of the Dwarven halls against the hordes of the Archdemon Dumat for the next 100 years, gaining and losing ground, but never backing away. From all over Thedas, they recruited whoever possessed the skill and strength to raise the Grey Warden's banner, making no distinction between elven slave or human nobleman, and finally, nearly 2 centuries after the first old god rose from the earth, the Grey Wardens assembled the armies of men and dwarves at the Battle of Silent Plains. It was then that Dumat finally fell and the first blight ended. The Tevinter Imperium would face a new challenge with the coming of the prophet Andraste. Thoughts of the blight grew distant. With Dumat's defeat, the Darkspawn were considered no longer a threat. But with the wisdom of hindsight, we know that conceit proved foolish indeed. The task of the Grey Wardens was far from over. From the Tales of the Destruction of Thedas by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. The Maker's First Children. The Maker's first creations were the spirits, glorious beings that populated the many spires of the Golden City, and the Chant of Light says that they revered the Maker with unquestioning devotion. The Maker, however, was dissatisfied. Although the spirits were like him in that they could manipulate the ether and create from it, they did not do so. They had no urge to create, and even when instructed to do so, possessed no imagination to give their creations ingenuity or life. The Maker realized his own folly. He had created the spirits to resemble him in all but the one and most important way. They did not have the spark of the divine within them. He expelled all the spirits out of the Golden City and into the Fade, and proceeded his next creation. Life. The Maker created the world and the living things upon it, separated from the Fade by the veil. His new children would be unable to shape the world around them, and thus would need to struggle to survive. In return for their struggle, the Maker gave them the spark of the divine, a soul, and he watched with pleasure as his creations flourished and showed all the ingenuity he had hoped for. The spirits grew jealous of the living and coaxed them into the Fade when they slept. The spirits wished to know more of life, hoping to find a way to regain the Maker's favor. Through the eyes of the living, they experienced new concepts: love, fear, pain, and hope. The spirits reshaped the Fade to resemble the lives and concepts they saw, each spirit desperately trying to bring the most dreamers to their own realms so they could vicariously possess the spark of the divine through them. As the spirits grew in power, however, some of them became contemptuous of the living. These were the spirits that saw the darkest parts of the dreamers. Their lands were places of torment and horror, and they knew that the living were strongly drawn to places that mirrored those dark parts of themselves. These spirits questioned the Maker's wisdom and proclaimed the living inferior. They learned from the darkness they saw and became the first demons. Rage, hunger, sloth, desire, pride. These are the dark parts of the soul that give demons their power, the hooks they use to claw their way into the world of the living. It was demons that whispered into the minds of men, convincing them to turn from the Maker and worship false gods. They seek to possess all life as their due, forging kingdoms of nightmare in the Fade, in the hopes of one day storming the walls of heaven itself. And the Maker despaired once again, for he had given the power of creation to his new children, and in return they had created sin. From The Maker's First Children by Bader, Senior Enchanter of Ostwick, 812 Blessed. The Legion of Steel. Paragon Caridin vanished in the 11th year of the reign of King Voltor, and with the Paragon, the entire process for golem manufacture was lost. Expeditions were sent into the deep roads to track him, but the Darkspawn drove them all back. Finally, in the 2nd year of the reign of Queen Getha, 126 golems, the entire Legion of Steel, were sent to recover the Paragon. None returned. The Shaper of Golem refused to support any further attempts to find Caridin, and the Paragon was officially declared dead. The Shaperate never recovered from the loss of an entire legion of golems, and never again allowed an all-golem regiment into the deep roads. From Stone Halls of the Dwarves by Brother Genitivi, Chantry Scholar. Inuthanera. Haren na malana salin, Emma ir a balas, Suviranan isala hamin, Vinan him dorfalas, Inuthanera na ravas. Vir sulanen, Vir durthera, Vir samal la numin, Virlath sa vunin. Translated from the Elven tongue. Elder, your time has come. Now I am filled with sorrow. Weary eyes need resting. Heart has become gray and slow. In waking sleep is freedom. We sing, rejoice, we tell the tales, we laugh and cry, we love one more day. From Inuthanera, traditional Elven song of unknown origin. The Legend of Luthias Dwarfson. At an early age, Luthias was smaller than most children of the Alamari. At the age of 12, Luthias saved Tutha, the son of the tribal chief, from his own dog. The dog had gone rabid, and when it attacked Tutha, Luthias slew it with his bare hands. Tutha's father, Mabane, was impressed with Luthias' strength and bravery, and so took him in as his own son. When Luthias grew to manhood, he became known for his charisma and bravery. While shorter than his fellow warriors, Luthias was stronger and doughtier than any warrior in the tribe. When Luthias was still a young man, Mabon sent him to the dwarven city of Orzammar to negotiate an alliance. Mabon's tribe had come into conflict with other Alamari, and he needed as much help as he could get. Luthias was unable to convince the dwarven king to aid his tribe, but fell in love with the king's daughter, Skaya. Luthias and Skaya fled the dwarven realm and returned to his tribe. Skaya taught Luthias the art of fighting without pain, the berserker state known as the Battle Wrath, and with it, Luthias became a renowned warrior. Luthias led his tribe to many victories, until eventually he replaced his foster father as chief of his tribe. This peace would not last. During a feast between the tribal leaders of the Alamari and the Avar, the beautiful and powerful Avar chieftain Morganon became enamored with Luthias and seduced him. Skaya learned of the tryst and fled the village to return to Orzammar. When Luthias rebuffed Morganon's offer of marriage, she left him in great anger, and from that moment on, there was war between the two tribes. For 15 years, the Alamari and Avar fought. During the Battle of Red Falls, a powerful young warrior from Morganon's tribe challenged Luthias to a battle. Luthias was injured grievously and slew the boy. Morganon revealed that the boy was Luthias' son, conceived 15 years ago during their tryst. She cursed Luthias as the murderer of his own kin, and the Battle of Red Falls turned against Luthias. Morganon defeated Luthias in battle after battle, until the Alamari were driven to the foothills of the Frostback Mountains. There, Luthias made a last stand. In the night before Luthias' final battle, Skaya came to him and offered him a dwarven suit of chain in exchange for a night together. Luthias agreed and wore the armor in the following morning in battle. The battle was fierce and bloody, and Luthias met Morganon in personal combat. In the end, Luthias slew the warrior woman, but not before receiving a mortal wound to his heart, the chain inexplicably unable to block her final blow. Luthias died, and after the battle was done, a party of dwarven warriors came down to the mountain and took the body of Luthias back to Orzammar. From the legend of Luthias Dwarfson, author unrecorded, circa 350 ancient. In praise of the humble Nug. I once served a human some Nug, and he proclaimed it was like eating an unholy union of pork and hare. The idea disturbed him so much that he declined to finish his serving and made himself content with some stale bread. Of course, this one goes to show that surfacers, human or otherwise, have tragically unrefined palates. The Nug is surely the most delicious animal I have ever tasted. Only a dead man would not salivate at the thought of a tender morsel of roast Nug melting in his mouth. The Paragon Varin, although his house has fallen, shall always be remembered for discovering the wonders of Nug flesh. Admittedly, it was discovered only out of desperation when he was separated from his legion and lost in the deep roads for a week, but we won't hold that against the good Paragon. While Nug pancakes and nuggets, my own children love these, are the Nug dishes one encounters most often, Nug can be prepared in other interesting and elegant ways. The late King Ansgar Iduken adored Nug, seared on a hot plate and finished in the oven, and dressed in a cream sauce flavored with deep mushrooms. You must be careful when using the mushrooms from the deep roads, because they often grow close to darkspawn bodies. They say that this is what gives them their unique flavor and intoxicating scent, but it also means that consuming too many of them may result in curious afflictions of the mind. From In Praise of the Humble Nug by Bragan Tolban, honored chef of House Iduken. Traditional Dwarven Folk Songs. Nug sits in the mud, Nug wiggles his ears, you catch the Nug, he slips away, Nug gets to live another day. Nug sits in the mud, Nug wiggles his toes. You hook the Nug, he slips away, now the Nug runs off to play. Nug sits in the mud, Nug wiggles his nose. You tickle the Nug, he laughs away, now the Nug sits on my plate. Nug pancakes a well-loved dwarven nursery rhyme. The Sermons of Divine Renata I. The weakest of mortal will is the great failing of all the Maker's children. We trade our honor as if it were the cheapest of currency. We do not understand what integrity is or what it is truly worth. From this ignorance, original sin was born. At some time, each of us has thought, what does it matter if I keep hold of my integrity? I am but one mortal. I am powerless. How blind we all are. The virtue of a single slave destroyed the Tevinter Imperium. The dishonor of one man drove the Maker from our sight. I tell you truly, nothing but the integrity of our hearts will win the love of the Maker back to us. It is all the power we shall ever possess to change this world for good or for ill. From A Sermon on Integrity. Journal of the Tranquil. Some laugh at me. I no longer mind. Once upon a time, I studied as they did. I learned under the tutelage of an enchanter and attempted to master the art of bending magic to my will. And while I did well enough, I know that I struggled. I saw the way the enchanter looked at me, the sidelong glances of worry and disappointment. While other apprentices were conjuring fire, I could barely light a candle. I was frightened of magic. When I was a boy, my grandmother regaled me with tales of the terrible Flemeth, the Witch of the Wilds. She told me of the Magisters and how their evil magic infected the world with the darkspawn. She told me of demons and how they were drawn to the dreams of those who possessed magic like moths to a flame. She told me all these things because, she said, the talent ran in our family's blood. And so it ran in mine. All my life I had dreaded the thought, prayed to the Maker that I was not so cursed, but I knew otherwise. Deep in my heart I knew. When the Templars came to our home, I knew. The Mage's Tower was terrifying, full of secrets and danger. The Templars glared at me as if I could spring into a full of abomination before their very eyes. My enchanter patiently attempted to teach me to marshal my willpower, my only defense should a demon attempt to enslave me, but it was no use. How many nights did I cry myself to sleep in that dark and lonely place? Then my heroine came at last, my final test. Face a demon, they said, or submit to the right of tranquility. They would sever my connection to the Fade, and thus I would never dream, and no demon could ever touch me. But I would also be unable to do magic, and I would never feel an emotion ever again. Facing the demon was certain death, so my choice was easy. It was not so painful. Now I serve in other ways. We Tranquil manage the archives. We run the tower, purchase the supplies, and maintain accounts. Our condition also allows us to use the magical element lyrium without ill effect, and thus we are the ones who enchant the magical items. We are the merchants who sell these items to those the circle permits, and the coin from those sales provides the circle's wealth. Thus we Tranquil are vital. The old and young may stare at me, ill at ease, but they would be worse off without me. They may think me a failure, but there is no horror for me now. I feel no fear of what I am. The shadows are merely shadows, and I am content. Eden the Meek, Tranquil of the Circle of Magi of Starkhaven, the Free Marches. Trian's Journal. 21 Ferventus. Notice Gorham running around trying to get pieces of my siblings' ceremonial armor ready for the feast. Stopped him and asked how preparations were going. He mentioned that one of the bracers had a spot of tarnish on it. Was quite impressed at his dedication. He is most loyal to our family. 23 for Ventus. Was on my way to discuss with father when came across a messenger waiting in the hall. On being asked why he was loitering about the royal palace, he mumbled something about having a gift for the new commander and asked me, begged almost, to pass along some object or other to my sibling. Me, the heir to the throne of Orzammar, does not run errands for a messenger. Must have been new on the job. Had him thrown out. However, still reeling from the gall of it. Later learned that Balin had told the messenger that the quickest way to get things to our sibling was through me, and made him wait until I came by. So unseemly for a prince of Orzammar to play such tricks. He needs to grow up and understand that, as royalty, he has responsibility. 24 for Ventus. Found Balin's little playmate again, lurking about the corridors outside his bedroom this morning. Must have been trying to steal something, or already had. Bosom seemed fuller than most decent ladies. Some jewels hidden in that bodice. Anyway, pretended not to see her. Would have been awkward otherwise. Wish Balin would keep her confined to his room, if he must have her around. Little brother is too concerned with fun and pleasure and not serious enough about his duties as a prince. Must talk to him about discipline when have time. Unfortunately, much too busy with the many tasks father has laid upon my shoulders. 26 for Ventus. Remember to send a small token of gratitude to Jaelia Helmi. Alliance between Helmi and Iduken must be kept strong. Lady Jaelia will, of course, accept proposal of marriage since we'll be king sooner or later, but never hurts to be polite and keep the lady happy. Hear that there are some surfacers selling silks. Maybe we'll send second out for something nice. Jaelia's favorite color? Turquoise. 28 for Ventus. Heard about there being provings held in her siblings' honor. They did not have provings for me at my first commission, and I'm the heir. What is going on? Must go watch these provings, make presence felt. Orzammar must not forget that I am to be her next king. From the Journal of Trian Iduken. Cautionary Tales for the Adventurous. It was then that he realized he wasn't alone. The abandoned camp in front of him was unbelievably welcoming, like a mirage. The fire felt like a warm hand grabbing his heart. It reminded him of a previous life, so long ago, when he was happy. Running on the sunflower fields with his boy, the sun on his face, lying next to the fireplace with his beautiful wife in his arms. He felt a sharp pain in his heart. His thoughts shifted to that fateful day when everything changed. Blood was everywhere. He held the body of his dead wife in his arms. Around him, the ashes of his burned house fell like snow. The stench was terrible. It smelled like darkspawn. He grabbed his axe, touched the icy cold hands of his boy, and left. He would kill them. He would kill them all. The pain in his heart was unbearable. He opened his eyes and saw the second most terrifying thing he would see in his life. A shadowy wraith leaning over him, leeching his life away. Around him the camp was gone, replaced by something familiar, almost peaceful. Bones, death, and despair. He wondered if all his life had been an illusion, if he'd ever had a family. For a brief moment, he felt relief. You can't lose something you've never had. But being this close to death brought clarity. He knew it was real. Everything else was an illusion. You could see a smile on his torn face. He had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. He lifted his weak arms, grasped the demon's face, and kissed it. It felt like kissing a cloud made of sand and dust. Suddenly, all sorrow left him, and with it, the last bit of life he had. Before his limp body hit the ground, it was all over. He was finally free. From Cautionary Tales for the Adventurous by Brother Ramos of Gilherme, 794 Storm. And that concludes this volume of Lore Listening Library. Tune in next Friday where we go over some of the notes left behind in Dragon Age Origins.